Ben Lord, Royal Commentator. Hi, Ben.
Hello, good morning, Nicky.
There was common sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of emotive reflections that have been offered there by the three callers this morning, and I don't think anybody can stand in disagreement to any of what they have said. But in terms of the kind of question you asked at the top of the hour, should he appear on the balcony again? Let's just reflect and recollect what is fact here. And the fact is that Harry, together with Meghan, made the decision 5 years ago to withdraw from royal life. That didn't mean that they were divorcing themselves biologically from the family, but they were essentially divorcing themselves from the workings of the royal household. And therefore, they made that decision on the basis that they didn't want their life microscopically played out in the media, in public, and they wanted that privacy. What has happened since is anything but. They have allowed every inch and minutiae of their life to be played out on the public stage, whether that be through Netflix documentaries, whether it be through books being released, whether it be whatever it has been about, ultimately to derive income, of course, because they've got to stand on their 2 feet now that they are no longer working royals. But in essence of what last week's court business was all about, I just wonder if Harry would still be taking the line that he is if the result had have gone the other way. Would he now be as reflective and as willing to conciliate and reconcile if he hadn't have lost his case? Because ultimately, other than the senior members of the royal family, which is essentially the King and the Queen, the Prince and Princess of Wales and their family, unless any of the other members of the family are on working duties, none of them have the extent of security that Harry was expecting and indeed challenging through the legal system. You cannot compare the role of former prime ministers and the decisions that they take, which ultimately can include taking countries to war, and the extent of security that then has to enshrine them. You cannot compare the role of a prime minister with that of a member of the royal family. That is, you are not comparing with apples there, and to cite that is quite disingenuous. So I come back to the fact, the Princess Royal, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, they don't get any 24/7 security unless they are on official royal duties. Indeed, Princess Diana's security detail diminished of her own volition, of her own choosing. Tragically, though, those events unfolded, but that was her decision, because when she ceased to be an HRH, she was no longer an active member of the royal family. Harry is essentially in the same position, and he chose that for himself, and therefore you have to be a grown-up and take responsibility for your own actions and decisions.
Yeah. Reading around this, I understand that the Duke has in private cited the Liz Truss example, disingenuous as it may be. What did he mean? This is all very, very interesting, Ben. What did he mean when, and you referenced it there, the death of his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, when she had less security? When he said, some people want history to repeat itself, which is pretty dark. What did that mean?
I mean, I think if you interpret the tone of what he was saying there, it is obviously for Prince Harry, much like his brother, you know, the loss of their mother is something that none of us can fully appreciate how that must feel. Although with what we now know and understand all these years later, I think what we have to just take into consideration is there an element of melodramacy in what's been said here? You know, the reason that those events happened that night is simply because the princess did her own thing, which is exactly what
the driver
Harry
was
and
drunk.
his wife are doing.
But then he said, he said, some people want history to repeat itself, which is pretty dark. And then he said, he was asked who that was. And he said, I'm not going to share at this point. I know all the names of the people that were involved in this process. What's he talking about?
But this is very comparable to when the Duchess of Sussex was expecting their first child, and there are supposed allegations made as to speculation over what colour the child would be when it was born, and that he knew the identity of who said that, but wouldn't reveal it. And the position that Her late Majesty took at the time was that recollections varied, I think was the quote that was used. So it's all very well citing, I know who these people are, but I'm not going to say. But again, that's not really helping the cause here. Ultimately, you chose a position to not be a working royal any longer, and that comes with its own consequences for very, very different reasons. The Duke of York is experiencing the exact same thing. He is no longer an active working royal because of the disgrace that he has brought upon himself and the family, and therefore is on his own. And therefore, albeit for different reasons, Harry is in no different a position. And what entitles him to be on that balcony any more than some of his cousins who were also not on the balcony yesterday?
Stay there. Marie in Dorset and Keith in Birmingham and Cathy in Bognor Regis, thank you, and some texts coming in as well, some of which are blaming Meghan. But what I would put in is the thought that if he says, I know who's, well, that whole quote again, some people want history to repeat itself, which is pretty dark. I know all the names of the people that were involved in this process. But he's not going to share them at this point. If he says, I'm not going to share things at this point, it's not really going to encourage his family to speak to him again in case he shares the conversations that they subsequently have. That's a point made earlier on by one of our callers as well. But Don in Essex's call was just fantastic, talking about what a monumental waste of time this is. I'm just wondering, before we hear from Keith and Marie and Cathy, do you think we are at the point of no return, Ben, when it comes to the brothers?
I would love nothing more as a fellow human being than to see but to see them. We've all had chapters in our own individual families where there is disgruntlement, there's fallout, there's disagreement. Sometimes that can be repaired, sometimes it can't. I suppose the big difference here is most people's family affairs happen behind closed doors and don't play out on the world stage as the events of the last 5 years between the two brothers and the king have played out. It would be, I'm sure, pleasing to many to see them be at least able to be in the same room, as they are going to have to be down the line in the future. But whether or not there is able to be the extent of forgiveness, as has been cited in one of the early calls, will very much be balanced against the other kind of Christian value of treating others as you wish to be treated. It's all very well forgiving, but equally you've got to be treating people nice in the first place to perhaps avoid falling into the arena where you need to forgive.
Keith in Birmingham.